I always think of this as very much like the paintings of Christ in the Garden of Gethsemane after the crucifixion, and he meets with Mary Magdalene in the garden. It's something to do with the foliage, and of course Ma is like Christ, and Mary Magdalene is prostrating in grief at his feet after the crucifixion. And he says, "Touch me not, for I have yet to ascend unto my Father." And it's the connection with the garden that gives it that quality. And I know that a priest saw this, a Christian priest saw it. He said, "Anandamayi is the most Christian living being that I have ever seen pictures of." Women with Ma taking a walk in the sun on a cold winter's day at Vindichal, on the top of the hill of Vindichal, which was an ancient sacred place, some 50 miles from Benares. This also on the left is a Rodin sculpture, the praying hands, and it's called the Cathedral. And of course this says something. I'm afraid I don't know what it is that it says, but it tells you what you get all the information you need from that script there. Ma's hands. At the top is a painting by a very devout Florentine painter called Fra Angelico, and I think it's a very, very beautiful holy scene of people who are paying their respects to a great divine figure. And here we are in the ashram in Benares with the children very sweet in the background. 2 little children, and this nice quiet conversation is going on, very relaxed, lovely mood of quiet thoughtfulness in both images, I think. Here are 2 very, very different ways to look at the feminine divine. The one on the left is Indian, of course, and it's, I think, 5th century AD, and it's very formal but also very gentle, and there's a wonderful suggestion around the eyes of illumination. And the one on the right is a painting of the Virgin Mary by Leonardo da Vinci. It's a detail. It's a very charming picture of Virgin Mary and a relative called Saint Elizabeth, and John the Baptist and Christ are children, and they're playing at their feet. And in the distance are wonderful mysterious mountains. But it's the tenderness of this Leonardo which I think is so particularly radiant and beautiful. There are very few pictures, in my opinion, which have the quality which I see in Ma. Very few paintings can get that. It is so alive and so magical. This is one of the very few that has something of that. In a way, there's nothing to say here. There is such a parallel, such a close affinity, and of course the quality which is remarkable in the wall is the rapt attention to a focus, and of course the focus in the photograph of Ma is Ma herself. But if you look at this line of heads and then look at them bunched together in the other 3 paintings that are all 15th century Italian paintings, frescoes, and I really do think that there is a wonderful affinity between them, which makes one realize that in the domain of feeling, that religions are one, and one of the best ways to bridge the gap of difference between one faith and another is through the quality of feeling, and especially amongst young people. The young people are universally are universal in their loveliness.
Yes.
I've always thought that there is an element of the primeval in Ma's, the structure of Ma's head. It's young and beautiful, but it's also very ancient. There's an ancient quality about Ma's head which always struck me as being quite extraordinary. And these seem to me to be part of the same ethos or mood.
Mm-hmm.
They are, of course. This is Ma consulting with her close devotees about some matter. She's in earnest discussion about something serious, and everybody's in a wonderful state of almost a kind of spiritual languor.
Yes.
They're languid in their relaxation. But of course one can equally say, well, it's Kuan Yin also.
Yes.
And this is a queen here.
This is a
Good. Here it's celebratory and joyous, but joyous in a kind of very. This is an evening sun scene, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
And there's a wonderful, wonderful thoughtfulness on Ma's face. This one is a discussion. They are all talking, and the mixture of orange and white, I think, is rather a lovely interplay, which sort of suggests the to and fro of conversation.
Mm-hmm.
And the painting is by Rembrandt, and it's the return of the prodigal son into the welcoming arms of his father after he's led a dissolute life. It's a famous biblical story. This is a most remarkable example of Ma responding to somebody who's prostrating. She's gathering up into herself the feeling that is being given to her.
Exactly.
She's in a very, very exalted state. It's a sort of rapture. Quite amazing. I mean, it's a very special picture in that respect. Ma with a hibiscus in her hair, I always love that. Very fond of hibiscus, and that's the best place for it. Jasmine.
Jasmine.
Jasmine. Hibiscus and jasmine. I asked her if I could take her. She was sitting on the veranda of Vinci, and I passed a message up. Would it be all right for me to come up and take a serious picture,
Mm-hmm.
careful picture with a tripod? And she agreed. And sometimes people would say, why is she not looking at you? And I say, it's because she's looking at me, but my camera is below. And she's not looking into the camera, she's looking at me. And this one in the garden at the Benares ashram was one of the very, very, I think it's the first portrait that I took of her, when I had only been there 2-3 days, ever. And I think it's one of the most gentle, tender, sweet mood kind of photographs that I ever took of her. Superficially, the first thing one thinks of, she's in a very stern mood. She's actually in a very exalted mood, and if you look very carefully, she's made an arch out of her forehead, and the eyes are very outreaching, to those who are around her. So it's an amazing contrast between a kind of very high state of elevation, of high spiritual elevation on the one hand, and on the other a kind of compassionate receptivity to those who are around her. And they're both there in the face. And this is what I worked at until I got it right. The hands are deliberately played down because the whole picture rises up to the head. And the actual secret of it is that she's longer in the painting than she is in reality. There's more distance between her head and her hands than it was in reality as I looked at her when she was in this mood. Because I remember she was in the most extraordinary mood that day. And that remained with me indelibly. And in order to get that soaring upward effect in the picture, I have distorted. That's what you do in a picture, to accentuate, to evoke something which you cannot get from a photograph. There she is at Vinci. Thompson used to say you could tell that she was a completely realized woman from the way she walked. She had no ego, absolutely no ego, and that was visible in her walk. It was a very interesting observation to make. And the portrait of her on the right, I think that one of the things about it is the hands, how she holds her hands. Again, it's receipt, isn't it? She's receiving something, and she's saying, I am receiving what you're giving me. It's the same photograph, the same transparency, but printed in colour and printed in black and white, and with a different composition. Creating, curiously enough, from exactly the same image, creating a different mood in both of them. They both sort of say something different. I can't define what the difference is, but it's there, isn't it? So it's very grave. But of course, the hand gesture, the way in which the hand in each is saying something, they're both saying different things, but the hand is being used for a didactic purpose. The painter has made the hand tell something for him, and I as a photographer have caught the hand gesture to go with the expression on her face. She's making a point, and you can see it in the shape of her lips. She's making a point. She's making something. She's being quite emphatic about something, and she's emphasizing it with her hand. This is the Delphic Sybil. And the Delphic Sybil is the Greek archetype to which Ma relates. The Sybil is a wise woman, a prophetess, and somebody to whom people go to get advice about major things. The Delphic oracle would be consulted by the commander-in-chief of the army before going into battle with the Persians. Vinci. She is pausing. Her body is not doing anything. She's not speaking. She's listening, and it's become very receptive. And that is a most extraordinary phenomenon. That very, very few people have that. I mean, people can be intelligent and kind and so forth, but this quality of using the body as a way of communicating. I mean, yes, of course, a dancer will do that, but that's a formal use of the body. Ma's using it as a means of intimate expression.